guys, this is Kris Jones for a special episode of Beyond Local. We're coming to you here live from Studio 16 South in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania at the Accelerator. This is a very, very important time for business owners around the world. You know, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and we're also in the midst of an economic downturn that is extraordinarily concerning to anyone who is a business owner or who has to make decisions regarding business. And so today's podcast is going to really focus on what to do with your business during the economic downturn. And I'm really excited to have Kris Nash join us again to help us really think through how important decision making is right now. And so, I'm your host, Kris Jones. And for those of you that don't know me, I've been an entrepreneur for 20 years. And, I'm in a unique position right now to be able to provide you with some advice, as Kris is. We've both been entrepreneurs for several decades, and we've had to weather storms. And so, Kris, this is a precarious time. This is in many ways, a nerve-wracking podcast that we have to do.
For sure.
We as entrepreneurs are in the midst of making these decisions ourselves.
We are. We're thinking about it. We're thinking about the financial implications. We're thinking about the longevity of accounts that have been with us for time, landing new accounts and those organizations that are thinking about spending money. So there's a lot of implications. I think it'd be good in this particular podcast to really focus on the marketing element of it. There's a number of considerations in business in general and making tough decisions about even where you put your employees. Some companies have to make decisions because they have physical staff that have to get product out the door. So, everyone should be diligent on the side of making sure they're looking at the CDC and the World Health Organization and following those protocols. That's paramount for one.
Sure.
Let's not ignore that. But I think it'd be great just to hear your perspective on weathering the 2008 crisis and maybe getting a perspective on what happened at Pepper Jam because you were running an affiliate and marketing agency at that time. And that's one of the most precarious positions to be in business.
Yep. So in 2008, we were one of America's fastest growing companies. We felt unstoppable. We thought we were invincible. While many of my friends and colleagues across the country were announcing layoffs and making other really difficult decisions, we thought we were going to be able to stick it out. And I actually got advice from the CEO of Maine's Paper, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, private company. And he said, Kris, now is the time when your leadership will be tested. Now is the time when your leadership will be tested. And so I'm going to give you guys some reflections real quick. And Kris, you could add in some tidbits as well from your extraordinary, background as a leader. The first thing, guys, is you need to think through various outcomes, including the worst case scenario. You're watching the same news programs and taking in a lot of the same information that we are. This is really an information overload. You need to think through the various outcomes. Now is not the time to be conservative with what potentially can happen in the economy and what might happen to yourself or to your staff as it relates to their health. So I'm just encouraging you to think through the outcomes. When I go back to Pepper Jam, I really think my leadership was tested. And I'm kind of like what I've learned through many years of experience is I'm a highly effective leader during tough times. And one of the ways that I've done that is that I know that, Tony Robbins says, in your moment of decision, your destiny is shaped. So you need to make decisive decisions. And when you make those decisions, they need to reflect both the worst case scenario as well as other potential outcomes. And this is critical. You need to inform and be honest with your team, with your staff, with the people who are impacted. This is not a time to hold information. It's a time to be brutally honest and be decisive.
I think just a small caveat to that but you also want to instill confidence,
Sure.
a calm, and I think that one of the most important things you can do, whether it's related to marketing or running your operation, is making sure that you have a plan, you explain that plan, and you make that super clear. And I think the most important part, though, beyond that, is actually being proactive right now. I think that that's a mistake that if you look at kind of a global scale right now, those areas that maybe delayed a result in this, and look at all the universities, for example, that are closing and going remote right now. The NBA just canceled the season, for example. So those are really proactive and bold statements, and there's some big time dollars involved in that. So I think that that should sort of trickle down from a business standpoint in making sure you're looking at this methodically and making a plan for it.
The second tip is this is not a time to make emotional decisions. If you feel overly emotional, take a deep breath. We're all in this together. This is one of the things that's most challenging about right now is we don't know ultimately what's going to happen. So that's why, to my previous point, you really do have to plan for the worst, right? You do at least have to consider that as you're making decisions, but don't make emotional decisions. Now, let's dive into what you do on a daily basis and at LSEO.
Sure.
And, LSEO, it's interesting. It reminds me of Pepper Jam a lot, and I fortunately, I advise the company. I'm active with you guys in making decisions. But it reminds me of Pepper Jam because we're growing fast. Our products work, but inevitably, we're encouraging people to make tough decisions. So let's get into this idea of what business owners should do about marketing and advertising spend. Keep a couple of things in mind. First, minimally, this pandemic is likely to last for 6 to 8 weeks.
Sure.
If you want to even, be more conservative there, maybe 8 to 12 weeks. The decisions you make now will impact, this is critical, how strong or weak your business is when the economy turns up. That is paramount to some of the advice we're about to give to our listeners and our viewers. So it is reasonable to cut expenses, to look for opportunities right now, to trim some of the fat, so that all businesses, the success of those businesses is a function of their income and expenses and their balance sheet.
There's a really interesting adage, and by no means did I make this up, but the statement goes that when times are good, you should advertise. And when times are bad, you must advertise. Yeah. And I think that really is the theme that we carry forward. Obviously, that sounds self-serving, but we were doing research on this, and the companies that maintained or increased their advertising or market opportunities during the toughest times, and I'm going back. You can look back in the 70s, you can look back in the 20s. And there are examples of companies, like Rice Krispies, for example, when certain cereal manufacturers were pulling back on their advertising, and the company that created Snap, Crackle, and Pop during that time, they gave kind of like a little glimmer of hope in there. And Kellogg in that period increased their market share significantly through that opportunity because they did not cut back on advertising. And we're talking back in the 20s when you can just imagine the impact. It's so far beyond what we could even comprehend because of the Great Depression.
Well, let's peel back the onion on this, because I don't think it would be great advice for us to tell other business owners not to touch their advertising or marketing. I was thinking through this prior to this podcast, because I know how important what we're saying is to those that are listening and viewing this. The way that I think about it is that you have paid advertising, right, which has a cost. It's much more transactional. So you have to look at the success of that based on the cost per acquisition and the lifetime customer value. Because the economy is likely to be impacted over the next 3 to 6 months, that long-time customer value is in question. So we have to be careful about transactional types of spend.
For sure.
And so, with that said, I would be much more careful about spending, on Facebook ads and Google ads, simply unless you're confident that your cost per acquisition and your lifetime customer value is in check, meaning that for every $30 you spend, you're going to make that up and make a ROI, a profit on it over time. That's why my message really is, and I'd like to get your reflection to see if you agree on that, but that's why my reflection is this. I'll tell you what we did at Pepper Jam. I'll tell you what we did at LSEO, and I'll share with what I think the viewers and listeners should do. SEO is your insurance plan. The thing about SEO versus paid is that it has a cumulative, compounding, long-term investment.
We promote that aspect of it.
And so for those of you that are considering cutting advertising expenses entirely, do not touch your SEO. Do not touch it. In fact, if you're cutting ad spend in, say, newspaper advertising or billboard or radio or Google or Facebook ads, consider how much of that budget you could move into SEO. And again, the reason is that there will be a time when you will have to be judged based on your strength or your weakness of the economic turnaround. And if at that point you've cut all of the resources that allow your business to grow and function off, you're in trouble. But if you invest in the most critical channel of all right now, this isn't a one size fits all, but if I was on a stage right now in front of 10, 20,000 people and a microphone went in my face and they said, Kris Jones, what's the one thing? I would say SEO, not even a question. Don't touch your SEO.
Part of it is, and I know we referenced this in a previous podcast, but when we profiled the fastest growing companies in the United States through the Inc. 5000 survey, the overwhelming majority said that SEO was 80%, and I was shocked by that, and I know we already talked about that, but 80% said SEO was an enormous part of their growth plan. Mm-hmm. So,
do you have any other reflections? So some of the takeaways here, in your moment of decision, your destiny is shaped, right? So it's highly important that you don't make emotional decisions, that you take what's going on very serious. When it comes to making these decisions, do not err on the side of this is not a big deal. As we sit here, the economy is in a significant downturn. The stock markets are hitting, mandatory pauses. This is a difficult time.
For sure.
So decision making is paramount. And then number two, since you run the day-to-day of a digital marketing agency, we wanted to chat about this idea of what to do. And if you starve all of your marketing and advertising, you may be, and I hate to say this, either putting a nail in the coffin or closing the coffin when the economy turns up.
I think that's absolutely the case. So one of the things to consider is that there's going to be a collective pullback in a lot of these areas. So right now, the cost of advertising on average is going to start to drop because it's less. There's less distraction right now because you're going to have fewer advertisers. So let's say, I understand the idea of investing in the long-term piece. I think that's actually the most important statement to be made today is that you must make an investment now when everyone else is tentative. Yep. That's sort of a blanket. Now, where you spend that money, I think, is super important. SEO, to me, obviously, it feels self-serving, but it's a no-brainer because of the positioning it creates long-term. Yeah. The flip side of that, though, is in some of these direct advertising opportunities, particularly as it relates to paid ads, cutting back there might be an appropriate method, but I think you're going to naturally get that opportunity because the cost of ads within that from a competitive standpoint are going to slightly drop. But pulling out completely and just gifting that to your competition right now, it's proven through all these examples. Please look them up. There's a wonderful Forbes article about what to do in an economic downturn and if you should pull back on advertising. And I referenced some of those statements already. But the companies that stick it through end up popping on the other side of this. Sure. Even McDonald's did this during previous recessions, and Pizza Hut, stole some of that market share while McDonald's dropped off. And those are examples at the highest level. So if you just think about those, I'd strongly encourage you to study the actual spend connected to it and look at the competition because there's less noise, there is less opportunity for your competition to be in your face as well. And if you continue to put your marketing and advertising out there, you're going to end up with a greater share of market on the other side, as opposed to losing that ground and sort of shooting yourself in the foot twice. Sure, the economic downturn, it's here, but what are you going to double down on that pain, or are you going to try to take advantage of that when other companies are more conservative?
Well, listen, really appreciate your input today. For the listeners and the viewers, wishing you guys nothing but the best. If LSEO could be of any service, or if Kris or I, we're both very active on social media. If you'd like to shoot us a question, please do so. Wishing you nothing but the best. Be safe. Don't make emotional decisions, and be very, very careful that when we come out as an economy, that you're prepared. Wishing you nothing but the best. Take care.